The noon sun sat high over the frontier town, bleaching the dust from the street and pressing the heat into every breath. Horses stamped at the hitching post, their reins slack, flies humming around leather and sweat. The cowboy had just finished tightening the cinch on his gelding when he felt a tug light, hesitant at the hem of his coat. "Sir?" The voice was small, barely strong enough to carry past the clatter of the saloon doors. He turned to find a boy no older than 7, boots scuffed thin at the toes, hat too big for his head. The child's eyes were steady in a way that didn't belong to children. They held a careful courage, practiced and worn. The boy swallowed and glanced back toward the general store. "Please," he said again, as if repeating a word he'd rehearsed all morning. "Please take my mama." The cowboy followed the line of the boy's look. A woman stood half in shadow near the porch, hands folded tight in front of her. She didn't raise her eyes. Her dress was clean but mended more than once, and at her collarbone a faint discoloration peeked out where the fabric dipped yellowed, like a bruise past its worst but not yet gone. There were others if a man knew where to look. The careful way she held her left arm, the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she kept herself small, as if hoping to pass unseen. Around them, the town went on pretending. A shopkeeper counted change too loudly. A pair of men laughed at nothing in particular. No one stepped closer. No one stepped away. The cowboy knelt so he was eye to eye with the boy. "That's a big thing to ask," he said quietly, not unkindly. "I know," the boy replied. His hands were fisted at his sides. "But she's good. She works hard. I can work too. I'll do anything." The words landed heavier than any saddlebag. The cowboy's gaze flicked back to the woman. At last she looked up just enough to meet his eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also a fierce, protective resolve that made his chest tighten. She shook her head once, a small motion meant for the boy alone, but he didn't see it. He was watching the cowboy, hope balanced on the edge of breaking. "What happened to you?" The cowboy asked the woman, though he already knew the shape of the answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her voice, when it came, was steady but thin. "We don't aim to trouble you, sir." The boy stepped forward, putting himself between them without realizing it. "He's coming back," he blurted. "She told me to be brave." The street seemed to quiet, as if the town itself leaned in to hear. The cowboy straightened, every old lesson from hard years rising to the surface. He could walk away. He could say it wasn't his business. That was the safer road. But safety had never been the same thing as right. He looked at the boy's boots, the woman's bruises, the dust that clung to all of them. Then he nodded once, slow and certain. "I've got a ranch a day's ride west," he said. "There's work to be done and room enough. No one there will raise a hand to either of you." The woman's breath caught. The boy's shoulders sagged with relief so sudden it looked like he might fall. "Thank you," the boy whispered, voice cracking at last. The cowboy rose and untied his horse. As they stepped away from the hitching post, the town exhaled and turned back to itself. But for the first time in a long while, the woman took a step forward without flinching and followed hope out of the dust. They left the town behind in a haze of dust and afternoon light, the sounds of voices and clinking bottles fading until there was only the creak of saddle leather and the slow rhythm of hooves. The boy rode ahead on the cowboy's spare horse, sitting stiff and proud as if afraid that one wrong move might undo the miracle that had just occurred. The woman followed on foot at first, leading her small bundle tied in cloth, until the cowboy reined in and offered his hand. "You can ride," he said simply. She hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the ground, tracing the cracks in the dirt as though answers might be hidden there. Accepting kindness was harder than enduring pain. Kindness came with questions, expectations, risks. Still, the boy looked back at her, worry pinching his face, and she nodded. With careful movements, she mounted behind the cowboy, keeping a respectful distance, her hands barely touching the saddle. They rode in silence for a long stretch. The land opened wide rolling grass, low hills, sky so big it made a person feel both free and terribly small. The cowboy did not turn around, did not press her with questions. Yet he could feel the tension in her body, the way she braced at every sudden sound, how her breath hitched whenever a rider appeared on the distant horizon. She kept her gaze lowered, as if the world were something dangerous to look at too directly. When she did glance up, it was quick and cautious, measuring escape routes, counting the spaces between rocks and trees. Survival had taught her that much. The boy finally broke the quiet. "Mama?" he asked. "We're really going, aren't we?" "Yes," she said, the word catching in her throat. She reached for him, fingers brushing his sleeve. "We are." Her voice carried a steadiness she did not entirely feel. Inside, her thoughts churned. She had learned not to trust promises, especially from men with strength in their arms and authority in their voices. She had learned how quickly safety could turn into a cage. Yet something about this man, his calm nod, the way he spoke to her son as if his words mattered, made her want to believe, even as fear warned her not to. As the sun dipped lower, the cowboy slowed the horses and offered them water. When he handed her the canteen, their fingers touched by accident. She flinched before she could stop herself. He noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't comment, didn't soften his voice with pity or harden it with suspicion. He simply waited, eyes on the horizon, giving her space to breathe again. "I'm sorry," she murmured, ashamed of the reflex. "Nothing to be sorry for," he replied. That simple answer unsettled her more than anger would have. She studied his profile, the weathered skin, the lines etched deep by sun and wind, the quiet strength that didn't demand attention. This was a man used to solitude, she realized, and perhaps that was why he understood hers. When evening came, they made camp near a stand of cottonwoods. The cowboy built the fire while the boy gathered sticks, eager to prove himself useful. The woman watched, hands folded tight in her lap. She felt exposed in the firelight, as though the shadows might reveal everything she had endured. The cowboy handed her a tin plate of food and sat a careful distance away. "You're safe tonight," he said, not as a promise but as a fact. She looked up then, really looked at him. For the first time since the bruises had bloomed on her skin, she allowed herself to imagine a morning without fear. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away, lowering her gaze once more. Hope was a fragile thing. Still, as the fire crackled and her son laughed softly beside it, she let herself hold that. Morning came pale and quiet, the kind of dawn that slipped in gently, as if afraid to wake old wounds. The woman rose before the others, out of habit more than choice. She smoothed her dress, checked her son's blanket, and scanned the horizon for danger that might already be riding toward them. When she saw only empty land and a sky brushed pink with sunrise, her chest loosened just a little. The cowboy was already awake, tending the horses. He nodded to her, the same calm nod he had given at the hitching post, as though nothing in the world needed explaining between them. She found she was grateful for that. They ate in silence. The boy chattered about the ranch he imagined ahead, big barns, fast horses, work he could do with his own hands. The woman listened, smiling faintly, while inside she weighed every word she might say to the man who had altered their lives with a single decision. When the boy wandered off to skip stones along the creek, she finally spoke. "I can work," she said, her voice low but firm. "Cook, clean, sew, tend animals, whatever you need. We won't be a burden." The cowboy looked at her then, really looked. Not at her bruises this time, but at the resolve in her spine, the way she held herself like someone braced against storms. "I figured as much," he replied. She swallowed. "We don't have money. I didn't ask for any." The answer startled her. She frowned, suspicion flaring despite herself. Then why? The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why help us?" He considered this, gaze drifting back to the water where her son played. "Because someone ought to," he said at last. There it was, the bargain, spoken without terms, sealed without ink. No contract, no conditions laid out in careful lines. Just a shared understanding. He would give them shelter and work. They would give him their labor and their trust, as much of it as they could spare. She nodded slowly. She had learned to read men by what they didn't say. He hadn't promised protection forever, hadn't spoken of rescue or salvation. He had offered something far rarer, a chance. They rode again as the sun climbed higher. With every mile, the land grew quieter, the road narrowing until it was little more than a trail pressed into grass. The woman's nerves stretched tight, but she kept her fears locked away. If this was a test, she would meet it standing. By late afternoon, they crested a low rise and the ranch came into view, a modest house. A barn weathered but sturdy, fencing that showed care if not wealth. Smoke curled from the chimney. It was not grand, but it was solid, rooted. The boy let out a small gasp of wonder. The cowboy dismounted and led them down. "You'll have a room," he said to her, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Meals same as mine. Work starts when you're ready." Her breath caught. A room. Not a corner, not a pallet in a shared space. Something that could be closed, claimed. She placed a hand over her heart, steadying herself. "Thank you," she said, and meant far more than the words could carry. As they stepped onto the ranch, she felt the weight of the past still clinging to her, but for the first time, it no longer felt like it was pulling her backward. The bargain without words had been made, and though fear still walked beside her, hope had found a place to stand. That night, sleep came in fragments. The woman lay awake in the narrow bed of the small ranch room, listening to every sound, the wind brushing the eaves, the distant stamp of horses, the soft breathing of her son curled beside her. Each noise carried the echo of memory, of nights when danger announced itself too late. She kept her eyes open until dawn bled pale through the window. Morning brought work, and with it, purpose. The cowboy showed her the routine without ceremony, where water was drawn, how the stove liked to be coaxed to life, which chickens were prone to wandering. He spoke little, but his instructions were clear, patient. When he left her to it, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. The boy took to the ranch as if it had been waiting for him all along. He followed the cowboy like a shadow, eager and determined, asking more questions than could be answered in a day. Watching them from the doorway, the woman felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest relief mixed with an ache she could not yet name. Still, fear traveled with her. Each creak of the gate made her turn sharply. Each rider on the far fence line sent her heart racing. The road that had brought them here felt fragile, as though it might reverse itself without warning and carry her back into the past she had fled. One afternoon, dust rose on the horizon. A single rider, too distant to recognize. The woman froze, her breath locking in her lungs. Her mind filled the gaps with certainty. He had found them. The cowboy noticed at once. He followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. "You don't have to hide," he said calmly. Not here. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the land itself could shield them. But fear is a stubborn companion. It doesn't leave just because it's told to. The rider passed without slowing, never turning toward the ranch. Only then did the woman realize her nails had dug crescents into her palms. She exhaled, long and shaky. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in copper and fire, she sat on the porch steps while her son played in the dirt. The cowboy joined her, resting his hat on his knee. "You're still running," he said, not accusing, just observant. "Yes," she admitted after a moment. "I don't know how to stop," he nodded, as if she'd said something wise. "Sometimes the road out of fear is longer than the road into it." The word stayed with her. She watched the horizon, the vastness of it, and understood that leaving was only the first step. Staying standing her ground, letting herself be seen, that would be harder. As night settled, She tucked her son into bed and kissed his hair. "We're all right," she whispered, though the words were as much for herself as for him. Outside, the cowboy made his final rounds, the ranch quiet and watchful. And though fear still walked the fences in her mind, for the first time it did not own the road ahead. The days fell into a rhythm that felt almost unreal. Morning chores, meals shared at the rough-hewn table, evenings softened by the quiet sounds of the land settling down. To anyone passing by, the ranch might have looked like any other hard work, long hours, simple living. But for the woman, every peaceful moment carried a shadow, as if calm itself were something that might turn on her without warning. She learned quickly. Her hands remembered skills she'd been forced to use before, though never for her own benefit, scrubbing floors, mending clothes, preparing meals from little. Here, the work did not come with shouted orders or raised fists. The cowboy thanked her once, awkwardly, and the word lodged in her chest like a stone she didn't know how to carry. Yet the shadows followed. A dropped pan made her flinch hard enough to send it skittering across the floor. A sudden laugh from outside the house had her heart pounding. She hated these moments, hated how the past reached out and claimed pieces of her present. The cowboy noticed, of course. He noticed everything, though he spoke of very little. When she startled, he moved more slowly. When he entered a room, he made sure his steps were heard. These were small mercies, but they mattered. One afternoon, while she hung laundry on the line, she caught sight of her reflection in the window glass. The bruises had faded to faint stains, but their memory lived beneath her skin. She touched her arm, fingers trembling, and wondered who she might have been if fear hadn't shaped her so deeply. Her son changed too. The tight watchfulness in his eyes eased. He laughed more, slept deeper, spoke of tomorrow instead of worrying about yesterday. Sometimes she caught him staring at the cowboy with open admiration, and it stirred a mix of gratitude and unease. She didn't want her child to trade one savior for another. She wanted him to grow believing in his own strength. Trouble came quietly, the way it often does. A neighbor rode by one evening with news carried like an afterthought. "Heard a rough man's been asking questions in town," he said. "Looking for a woman and a boy." The words chilled her. She felt the ranch tilt beneath her feet. After the neighbor left, she stood alone in the yard, dusk settling heavy around her. The cowboy approached, his expression unreadable. "I won't stay if I bring danger to your door," she said before he could speak. "We'll leave, tonight, if we have to." He shook his head. "Running won't end it," he said quietly. "And you don't owe me your disappearance." Tears burned her eyes, anger and fear twisting together. "You don't understand what he's like. I understand enough," he replied. "And I won't let shadows decide what happens on my land." The certainty in his voice unsettled her. No one had ever spoken that way for her before. She wanted to lean into it, to let someone else carry the weight for once. But fear had taught her self-reliance in the hardest way. That night, as the ranch slept, the shadows seemed longer, darker. Yet beneath them, something else was taking root, an unspoken promise that this place and the people in it would not yield so easily. The next morning arrived under a low, watchful sky. The woman felt it before she heard it, a tightening in her chest, an old instinct stirring her awake. She stood at the window longer than usual, scanning the open land as if it might betray a secret. Nothing moved but grass in the wind, yet dread settled in her bones all the same. By midday, the boy came running from the barn, breathless. "Mama," he said, "there's a man on the road." Her hands went cold. The rider approached at an unhurried pace, as though he had all the time in the world. He was broad-shouldered, sitting his horse with an easy dominance that made her stomach turn. Even at a distance she recognized him not by his face, but by the way he owned the space around him, the way the world seemed to bend to his anger. She stepped back, pulse roaring in her ears. "He found us," she whispered. The cowboy was already moving. He rested a steadying hand on her shoulder, not a claim, not a command, just a grounding presence. "Go inside," he said. "Stay with your boy." "I won't hide," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. Not again. The rider dismounted near the fence, eyes sweeping the ranch until they landed on her. His mouth twisted into a smile that held no warmth. "There you are," he called. "Been a long hunt." The word hunt sliced through her. Memory's surge doors slammed, promises broken, nights she'd prayed would end. Her knees threatened to give, but she stood her ground, every muscle screaming to run. The cowboy stepped forward, placing himself squarely between them. "You're on private land," he said evenly. "State your business and be on your way." The man laughed, a harsh sound. "That's my wife," he said, jerking his chin toward her, "and my boy. They belong with me." Something snapped inside her at the word belong. Before fear could stop her, she spoke. "I don't belong to you," she said. Her voice shook, but it carried. "And he's not going back." The man's eyes darkened. "You always were ungrateful." The cowboy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You heard her," he said. "Leave." For a moment, the world held its breath. The man's hand hovered near his belt, testing the space, the odds. He glanced at the house, the barn, the open land, calculating. "This isn't over," he said at last, mounting his horse. "You can't hide forever." As he rode away, the woman's strength drained out of her. She sank to the ground, shaking, the weight of years crashing down all at once. The cowboy crouched beside her. "He won't take you," he said, not as a comfort but as a vow. "Not from here." She looked up at him, tears streaking her face. The hunter had found them, but for the first time he had not claimed his prey. And though fear still lingered, something new stood beside it now: defiance. The hours after the man rode away passed in a tense, unnatural quiet. The ranch felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for something it could not yet see. The woman moved through her chores like a ghost, every nerve stretched tight, listening for hoofbeats that might return at any moment. By sundown, the air had turned sharp and restless. The cowboy checked the fences, the barn, the line of trees near the creek. He moved with purpose now, no longer just a man tending his land, but one preparing to defend it. He said little, but his presence steadied the woman more than words could have. "I should have ended this long ago," she said as they stood on the porch watching the sky darken. "I should have left sooner." "You did leave," he replied. "That counts." She hugged herself, staring at the red smear of sunset along the horizon. "He won't stop." "No," the cowboy agreed. "Men like that don't." As if summoned by the truth of the words, dust rose again in the distance. This time there was no mistaking it. The rider came hard and fast, anger driving him forward. The boy was ushered inside, the door barred behind him, his wide eyes filled with fear and trust in equal measure. The man dismounted before he reached the fence, fury rolling off him in waves. "You think you can steal what's mine?" he shouted. The cowboy stepped out into the open, placing himself squarely between the house and the threat. "This ends now," he said. The woman came to stand beside him. Her legs trembled, but she did not retreat. For the first time, she was not alone in the open. The man drew closer, voice dropping low and dangerous. "You don't know what she's like," he sneered. "She needs discipline." The word ignited something fierce in her. She lifted her chin. "What I needed," she said, "was to live." The man lunged. The moment shattered into motion boots on dirt, a fist raised, a sharp command from the cowboy. The confrontation was swift and brutal, a collision of past and present. The cowboy's strength met the man's rage, stopping it cold. When it was over, the man lay defeated in the dust, his authority broken, his threats reduced to empty noise. He scrambled to his feet, hatred burning in his eyes, but fear had finally found him too. "If you ever come back," the cowboy said, voice low and deadly calm, "you won't leave on your own." The man mounted his horse and fled, the sound of his retreat swallowed by the coming night. The woman stood shaking, the sky now deep purple above them. Tears streamed down her face, not of fear this time, but release. She had faced him, she had spoken, she had stood. As darkness settled over the ranch, she realized something profound had changed. The past no longer held the power it once had. At sundown she had taken her stand, and the world had not ended. Morning broke clear and still, as if the land itself had decided to offer a clean beginning. The woman woke before the sun, not from fear this time, but from a strange, quiet awareness. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest was lighter, not gone, but no longer crushing. The cowboy was already outside, repairing a fence rail broken during the struggle. She watched him for a moment from the doorway, the memory of last night replaying in her mind. Standing her ground, speaking her truth, surviving it. Freedom, she realized, wasn't just escape. It was choosing what came next. "I can leave," she said when she joined him. The words surprised them both. "Now that it's over." "I don't want to stay just because I'm afraid to go." He leaned on the fence, studying her carefully. "You should stay because you want to," he said. "Not because you owe me." The boy emerged then, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked between them, sensing the weight of the moment. "Are we going away again?" he asked softly. She knelt and took his hands. "No more running," she said. "But we get to choose where home is." The cowboy nodded once. "If you stay, it's on your terms. Work fair, pay fair. A room that's yours as long as you want it." She searched his face for expectations, for claims hidden beneath kindness. She found none, just respect and a steady patience that waited without pressing. The choice settled inside her like a deep breath. She thought of roads taken in fear, of nights spent whispering courage to her child, of the stand she had taken at sundown. She thought of mornings like this, quiet, honest, full of possibility. "We'll stay," she said at last, not a plea, not a promise made out of desperation, a decision. The boy smiled then, wide and unguarded, and ran off toward the barn, already imagining the day ahead. As she watched him go, the woman felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, ownership of her own life. Whatever came next would not be forced upon her. She had chosen this place, these people, this chance. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than victory. Freedom, she understood, was being seen, being heard, and being allowed to decide. And for the first time, the future felt like something she could walk toward, not something she had to flee. Time did not heal her all at once. It worked slowly, quietly, the way the land changed with the seasons. Days stacked upon days, and with them came a rhythm that no longer felt borrowed. The woman learned that healing lived in small things, in mornings without dread, in evenings that ended without tears. She kept busy. There was bread to bake, shirts to mend, fences to check. Her hands grew strong from honest labor, her back straighter. Some nights she caught herself humming while she worked, the sound surprising her into silence before it returned, soft and real. The boy flourished. He learned the names of the stars, the moods of horses, the pride of finishing a task on his own. Laughter came easily to him now, ringing across the fields. Sometimes she watched him and felt a pang not of regret, but of awe at how resilient a child could be when given safety. The cowboy remained steady, never crossing lines she had not invited him to cross. He knocked before entering her space. He asked rather than assumed. Trust grew not from grand gestures, but from consistency, from knowing what to expect and finding it kind. There were still moments. A raised voice in town sent her pulse racing. A sudden argument between strangers made her stomach twist. But now those moments passed. She breathed through them. She reminded herself where she was. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. Thunder cracked close, and instinctively she froze. Then she felt her son's hand slip into hers. "It's just noise," he said, echoing words she'd once whispered to him. She smiled through wet eyes. Healing, she realized, had come full circle. As weeks turned into months, the ranch felt less like refuge and more like home. She planted a small garden by the house, her fingers deep in soil that promised growth. The cowboy helped her build a gate, and she laughed when they argued over crooked boards. The bruises were long gone now, but the woman noticed something else in the mirror. Her eyes had changed. They no longer searched for danger first. They looked outward, forward. One quiet afternoon, she found the cowboy watching her and the boy from across the yard. "You did good," he said, meaning more than her work. "So did you," she replied. The words settled easily between them. Healing had not erased the past, but it had softened its grip. In the small, ordinary moments, she had reclaimed herself and built something lasting, piece by piece. Part 10. A family chosen seasons turned, as they always did, marking time in honest ways, new grass in spring, heavy sun in summer, the hush of fall settling over the land. What had begun as shelter became something deeper, rooted not in need but in choice. The woman stood on the porch one evening, watching her son ride across the field, confident and laughing. He was no longer the boy who had clutched a stranger's coat in desperation. He was growing into himself, carrying kindness and courage in equal measure. She knew then that whatever pain the past had left behind, it had not taken her child's future. The cowboy joined her, leaning against the rail. "He's turning into a fine young man," he said. "Because he learned what safety looks like," she replied. There was a pause, comfortable, familiar. They had grown to understand each other without rushing, without forcing names onto feelings before they were ready. Respect had come first. Trust had followed. "I never planned on a family," the cowboy admitted quietly. "But I wouldn't change this." She looked at him, really looked, and felt no fear rise in her chest, only certainty. "Neither would I." Later that night, as the fire burned low, the boy spoke words that sealed what had already been true. "Your family," he said simply, as if it were the most natural conclusion in the world. The woman felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from pain, but from gratitude. Family, she had learned, wasn't always born. Sometimes it was chosen, built from mercy, patience, and courage. As the stars spread wide above the ranch, she understood that the road that began with fear had led her somewhere unexpected. Not rescue, not dependence, but belonging. And this time it was hers to keep. The first frost came quietly, silvering the grass before dawn and turning the breath of horses into pale clouds. The woman stood at the window and watched the land wake, feeling a steadiness in her chest that once would have felt impossible. She no longer measured each day by what might go wrong. She measured it by what endured. Her son burst through the door, boots half-laced, laughter trailing behind him. "He said I can ride the bay today," he announced, pride shining in his eyes. Not the cowboy, not the man who helped us, just he. The word carried trust without thought, belonging without explanation. She smiled and poured coffee, the simple ritual grounding her. The ranch had shaped them all in quiet ways. It had taught her that safety could be consistent, that kindness didn't have to be earned through suffering, that a door could stay closed against the past without closing her off from the future. Later, as the sun climbed, she joined the cowboy near the corral. They worked side by side, mending a rail, their movements practiced and easy. Silence between them was no longer heavy. It was companionable. "I've been thinking," she said, choosing her words with care, "about what comes next." He didn't look up right away. "Me too." She set the hammer down. "I don't want to live like a guest," she said. "I want to build something." Together, if that's what you want. He finally met her eyes. There was no surprise there, only the same steady honesty that had carried them this far. "I don't believe in cages," he said, "or debts that never end. But I believe in choosing the same place every day." The truth of it settled between them. No grand promises, no rescue stories. Just a decision made freely, renewed each morning. That evening they shared a meal that felt like a celebration without being named as one. The boy talked endlessly, plans spilling out more animals, a bigger garden, a future that stretched far beyond fear. The woman listened, heart full, and realized how far they had come from the hitching post where hope had been a fragile thing whispered by a child. Afterward, as night wrapped the ranch in quiet, the boy looked from one adult to the other. "We're staying," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Then, with the simple certainty only a child could hold, he added, "You're my family." The word caught her breath. She reached for her son, pulling him close, and felt the last tight knot inside her finally loosen. Family. Not taken. Not owed. Chosen. The cowboy cleared his throat, emotion flickering briefly across his face. "I'd be honored," he said. Under the wide spill of stars, the woman understood something essential. The past had not been erased, but it no longer defined the shape of her life. She had stood, she had chosen, and she had stayed. Love, she realized, was not the absence of scars, it was the presence of respect. As the fire died down and the ranch settled into sleep, she felt a peace that did not depend on luck or silence. It depended on choice. And tomorrow,